Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH. Today we're looking at Winota, Joiner of Forces. So the boogeyman from Pioneer returns. Winota is a 4-mana Boros commander. It's a 4/4, and it says whenever a non-human creature you control attacks, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may put a human creature card from among them onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. It gains indestructible until end of turn. Put the rest of the cards on the bottom in a random order. So basically we want cheap and potentially evasive non-humans that we can use to attack with that will trigger Winota, and then we want expensive, powerful humans to cheat into play with it. So Winota is basically commonly known as Winota Stax, which we're primarily going to be a Stax deck that then takes advantage of small creatures that will trigger Winota, often mana dorks, and then big human payoffs and sometimes combo cards that we can get to from Winota. So we've got our card draw in Archivist of Ogma and Esper Sentinel, but again, not very much. And then we've got our combo cards, which is the typical ones you would expect. We've got combos with Combat Celebrant, Kiki Jiki, and Zealous Conscripts. We can Winota into a Combat Celebrant or a Zealous Conscripts. We cannot Winota into a Kiki Jiki. Also, if we Winota into a Combat Celebrant, it will not trigger, because we need to attack with it. It just puts it into play already attacking. So that is one thing to note about that, whereas Zealous Conscripts can win the game immediately if we have a Kiki Jiki in play. Also, there's going to be other things to note, like any creature in our deck, if it's a human, can be hit. If it's non-human, can trigger. So Archivist of Ogma, for example, is not a human and can therefore trigger Winota. Esper Sentinel is a human and cannot trigger Winota. We've got fast mana to get to Winota faster, although not too much fast mana. We've got Boros lands, a little bit more than I would expect normally at 32. Also, we've got Blinkmoth Nexus and Inkmoth Nexus as cheap man lands that we can use to trigger Winota. Then we've got a whole bunch of protection effects. So basically all of these are going to be designed to keep Winota in play. So Alseid of Life's Bounty to give it protection from a color. Cliffside Rescuer, tap, sacrifice it, target permanent you control gains protection from each of your opponents until end of turn. Although it is 2 mana and you do have to tap it and sack it. Deflecting Swat, Cavern of Souls, Grand Abolisher, Silence, Ranger Captain, and then Giver of Runes, Skrelv, and Mother of Runes to protect Winota. And then Hope of Girapur. Sack it until your next turn. Target player who was dealt combat damage by Hope of Girapur this turn can't cast non-creature spells. And specifically, so Ranger Captain and Mother of Runes cannot trigger Winota, nor can Grand Abolisher, but the other creatures can. You can also Winota into a Grand Abolisher, which can protect you from anything else your opponents are doing, although it is notable that our main way of combo winning is using Kiki Jiki loops or Combat Celebrant loops. So if we are hitting Grand Abolisher off of that, it's probably past the point where these would win the game. So we will have to wait until the next turn. Then we've got some ramp, mostly in the form of artifacts, but we do also have Ornithopter of Paradise because, again, as a non-human creature, we can attack with it to trigger Winota. Dockside also triggers Winota, as does Ragavan, but Professional Facebreaker does not. And Mer Convert as another mana source that's also a creature. So Winota would ideally like to be playing a bunch of like Llanowar Elves, Elvish Mystic, etc., but of course we're not in green, so we can't, so this is the best we can do in Boros colors. Then we've got removal. So this takes the form of various things. We've got Solitude, Skyclave Apparition, Goblin Crater Maker, which are all cards that can trigger Winota, and then Cathar Commando, which can be put into play with Winota. We also just have straight up Touch the Spirit Realm, Path to Exile, Shatter Skull Smashing, and Swords to Plowshares. Then we've got all of our Stax pieces. So this is what we're primarily going to be doing with Winota. So we've got Archon of Emeria, Deafening Silence, Eidolon of Rhetoric, and Aethersworn Canonist as our rule of law effects, with Aethersworn being the one that can actually be cheated in and the others not. Then there is our Stax card, or our taxing cards. So Glow Rider, Thalia, and Vryn Wingmare. I forget if Glow Rider is a human. I believe it is. So I believe you can Winota into Glow Rider and Thalia, but not Vryn, but Vryn triggers Winota. We also, of course, have Drannith Magistrate, which is basically in every white deck. We've got Spirit of the Labyrinth, Soulless Jailer, Sanctum Prelate, Phyrexian Revoker, and Magus of the Moon, human that can be hit off Winota. And because it puts it directly into play, our opponents do not get an opportunity to float any of their lands in response. And then one of the only 2 non-creatures aside from Deafening Silence, is Thorn of Amethyst. Again, our deck is mostly made up of creatures, or at least that's what we want to be putting out. So Thorn of Amethyst doesn't really hurt us too much, whereas it hurts our opponents more, presumably. Then we've got some tutors in the form of Enlightened Tutor, Imperial Recruiter, Recruiter of the Guard, Ranger Captain of Eos, and Mog Catcher, which searches for a goblin and puts it directly onto the battlefield. So specifically, we don't have too many goblins that we can go get, but that does include Dockside Extortionist and, of course, Kiki Jiki. And then I've broken it down into what I'll call Winota Enablers and Winota Payoffs. So this category is every creature in the deck that's not a human and can therefore trigger Winota. And this category is every creature in the deck that is a human and can thus be put into play with Winota. So first, the enablers. So we've got, of course, some of the ones that are here are going to be ones we've already seen. So the best ones are going to be as cheap as possible, probably having evasion, or just have some other effect that we want regardless. So Alseid of Life's Bounty, Archivist of Ogma, Archon of Emeria, Aven Mind Sensor, Cliffside Rescuer, Dockside Extortionist, Eidolon of Rhetoric. We also have Ginger Brute, which is a 1-mana creature that can become essentially unblockable for 1 mana and has haste, which is relevant for Winota. Giver of Runes, Goblin Crater Maker. We also have Rabble Master and Legion Warboss, which put in hasty goblins. So they put in more tokens so that we can get more triggers, and those goblins have haste. Hope of Girapur. Loyal Apprentice itself is a human, but it generates Thopters that have haste, and the Thopters can trigger Winota. Merconvert, Ornithopter, Phoenix Chick, Phyrexian Revoker, Phyrexian Walker, which is a 0-mana creature, and it's better than Memnite because we don't actually care about dealing 1 damage to our opponent, so as a 0/3 it is better than Memnite. Ragavan, we've got Signal Pest, which is hard to block, and Battle Cries our other creatures, including the various tokens that we're making off of our goblins. Skrelv, Soulless Jailer, Spirit of the Labyrinth, and Vryn Wingmare. And then for the payoffs, we of course have the combo type creatures like Zealous Conscripts. Mog Catcher is itself a human mercenary, Magus of the Moon, and we've been through some of these other ones like Combat Celebrant. So the ones that we haven't been through already, Blade Historian is a quadruple Boros hybrid creature. It's a 2/3 and it says attacking creatures you control have double strike. There is Greymond Avacyn's Stalwart. So this is the in-universe version of Rick from the Walking Dead Secret Lair. So it is a 4-mana 3/4, and it says, as it enters the battlefield, you choose 2 abilities among First Strike, Vigilance, or Lifelink. Humans you control have each of the chosen abilities, and as long as you control 4 or more humans you control get +2. Then there is Riona Fire Dancer, which is a 5-mana 3/4, and it says at the beginning of combat on your turn, you create X tokens that are copies of another target creature you control, where X is 1 plus the number of instant and sorcery spells you've cast this turn. They gain haste, exile them at the beginning of the next end step. So note, it is at least 1, even if you haven't cast any instants or sorceries. This also goes infinite with Combat Celebrant. You've got Serra Ascendant as a big beater. Notably, it is a human though, so this does not trigger Winota. And then finally, Eomer, King of Rohan, 5-mana 2/2 with double strike. Enters the battlefield with a +1 counter on it for each other human you control, and when it enters the battlefield, target player becomes the monarch. Eomer deals damage equal to its power to any target. So you become the monarch, and you shock something, / more than shock something if you've got more humans around. So, although there are ways to immediately combo and win the game with Combat Celebrant, Kiki Jiki, or Zealous Conscript, and that is one route that you can take with Winota, the other routes are often going to be just putting out Stax cards, like Magus of the Moon, like your anti-storm stuff, Rule of Law effects, like, just any of these Stax guys. It's going to be putting Stax guys in play and slowing down the opponent while continuing to develop your board basically for free because Winota triggers and you don't have to pay any mana for it. And then continuing to develop a board that either puts more and more Stax creatures into play, thus preventing your opponents from actually being able to cast anything or get through the Stax soft blocks, or just continue to put more and more human creatures into play that can eventually overwhelm the opponent with their massive power. In particular, cards like Blade Historian, Serra Ascendant, and Greymond, just enhancing the power level of all the creatures you have on the board. And yep, that is pretty much it. That is Winota, Joiner of Forces in EDH.